evening and welcome to the audio documentary with Dweezil Zappa. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me once again.
Well, hopefully that's a little habit we have here. So tonight we are going to talk about Confessions. Break it down a little bit and pull back the covers. See what you remember.
Let's see what we can do. I don't know if I'll remember everything, but I'll try to do the best I can.
All right. Well, it's a really, really great album for guitar lovers. It's got everybody on it too. So this is a good album for people that love the rock and metal of the late 80s, early 90s. Because you had everybody on this one pretty much, you know.
There were a few fun guest appearances. Just to recap, there was Zakk Wylde, Warren DeMartini from Rat, Tim Pierce, who's a friend of mine, who's a guitar player who's played on thousands of hit songs. And of course, Steve Lukather also is on the Confessions record. There's a story in Steve Lukather's book where Steve auditioned for my dad when he was real young, maybe 19 or so. And one of the things he was asked to play was the opening lick to San Bernardino, which is not necessarily the hardest thing to play, but it's a little quirky. So if you aren't paying attention, you could play it wrong. And I think he was nervous, so he wasn't playing it correctly, and then he wasn't remembering it. So my dad, as he tells it in the book, made an example of him and said, "You have no retention," and basically excused him from the audition. So he didn't feel so good about what had happened there, but he used that as a learning experience to make sure that he was as prepared as he possibly could be for any and all other musical encounters, so that that kind of situation wouldn't happen again. In the middle 70s, my dad's band was a coveted seat to get. So there used to be people that would try to audition just so that they could have it on their resume. And so they might try to get in there and then not stay for very long. So that's a tricky place for my dad, because it's so difficult to rehearse a band and then you have to replace somebody. Now the balance of everything's off. And so he ran into that a few times with different kinds of people. But there was one particular time where I saw this drummer audition and he was really just an imbecile. This guy pretended that he could read music, but clearly he couldn't. So the music was put in front of him, the Black Page, which is a very difficult piece of music of my dad's. And it's a drum solo originally. So he was supposed to be able to sight read this drum solo. And so it's put in front of him and he sits down and the cymbals are in front of him and he starts tickling the cymbals and doing this kind of thing like this. And he's thinking that that's impressive, or that somehow that would be viewed as him playing the music that's in front of him. So after about 25 seconds of this, my dad was just looking at him like, "What are you doing?" And it's, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll play it." So he adjusts the paper and he looks at it again, and then he starts doing the same thing. And my dad was like, "You're out of here." It was just, who would do that?
I might as well go over some of the other actors that are in this musical play of yours, Confessions. Josh Freese.
Josh Freese was the drummer. He was in my band at the time, and he was really, I think, 17, maybe 18 at the time. Yeah, he was a guy that really knew a lot about my dad's music, even at that time, but we weren't playing my dad's music, really. We played some of that stuff, and we were playing whatever my original music was, and he had very good retention. You know, the theme is retention right now. So he was able to learn a lot of stuff and remember it, and that's the reason that we actually were pretty prolific during that time. There was a lot of stuff. I think recording the album, there's probably 6 or 7 songs that didn't even make it to the record. So there's a lot of stuff we did in a very short period of time. The tracking was done in about 10 days, maybe 12 days tops. And we recorded all the songs that are on the record, plus the ones that didn't make it to the record. So my guess is that's almost 25 songs. Yeah, he was very articulate and could do some pretty clever drum fills even at the early age of 17, 18. So, and he was funny as hell. So it was a good time to have him in the band. But the rhythm section was Josh Freese on drums, and then Scott Tunis, who had played in my dad's band and played on my first album, and he was playing bass in the band. So Mike Keneally played some rhythm guitar and a tiny bit of piano on the record. But the rest of the band filled out on the record is members of the band Extreme. Obviously, I played lead guitar and rhythm guitar on all the tracks, but Nuno Bettencourt sang lead on a couple of songs as well as background vocals with the rest of the guys. So it was Nuno, Pat Badger, and Gary Sharon from Extreme doing the majority of all the background vocals. So it was kind of it was this amalgamation of textures. They had always done a lot of really cool background vocals on their own records that were reminiscent of Queen or Cheap Trick or combinations of all of the above. And so that was kind of a texture that I was looking for the record. And when I was making the record, I had reached out to Nuno. I had never met him, but I think, as I recall, I wrote him a letter, and then we ended up talking on the phone. And then he was working on the second Extreme record, Porno Graffiti.
Yeah.
And when he finished that, he had about 2 or 3 weeks off. So he just stayed in Los Angeles at the completion of that record, and then we recorded.
Oh, so the album hadn't even come out yet, huh?
Right.
For them. Wow.
Sometimes there's production that happens on records where a producer will have their stamp and they will make a certain sound, like Mutt Lang really developed a specific sound, and it's an amazing sound. But in this case, it wasn't a situation where a specific sound was required to be stamped on every song. It was just whatever was happening as we went along. We just followed what the possibilities could be. So we just added things. We experimented and did all kinds of different things. So it was a really fun record to make. It was, there were a lot of laughs in the studio, and we worked really quickly. Generally speaking, the role of the producer is to make sure that all the songs have a game plan, and there's all these options that can take place in the studio. And sometimes those can take up too much time and you can't stay on budget and all those kind of things. That's part of what a producer needs to be able to do, is have enough of an overview to keep things moving. And between me and Nuno, there was enough creative flow to say, what if we try this? What if we do that? Okay, let's do it. And it was really fast moving ideas, and we just kept it going the whole time. So one of the things that he was really good at was arranging background vocals. And that was the thing that they just kind of were able, because they sang together so well already in their band, they could just bang out 2, 3, 4 songs of background vocals in, just a couple of hours. So it wasn't a super challenging process for them to do that, but it created a good sound that was just part of that record.
Did you have it pre-written, a lot of it, or did things change as you guys were going?
Well, it definitely morphed. There were melodies that were specific, and then they needed to be worked through to have the embellishment of the harmony or counterpoint. And those are the kind of things that in the moment you could say, what about this? Or let's try this. And we listen to it and just make a decision. Let's do it like that. Okay, let's double it, let's triple it, or whatever it is. And that was really just the way it went. There were a lot of, the songs were pretty well already written and organized and arranged to be played a certain way. I remember we tracked 5 or 6 songs a day because we knew the songs. We were rehearsed well enough so that we could get the basic tracks minus any vocals. It was just the instrumental version of the tracks, maybe do a couple of little overdubs, and that was there. Then we just moved on to the vocals. So with that amount of music to do in that short period of time, you could tell that we were moving pretty quickly, because I don't remember it being more than 12 days of recording time. And if we recorded over 20 songs, some days we would do multiple, some days we might do one or two, but it just really was constantly moving quickly. And then getting the guitar overdubs done, that was kind of the last couple of days.
Yeah.
And when we finally mixed the record, we did that in a studio that Extreme had worked at back in Massachusetts. It was in Framingham, I believe.
Yep.
So it was in somebody's back house garage, and we did the mixing there. And the engineer who had done work with Extreme for the first few albums was a guy named Bob St. John, and he mixed the record, and he was also the engineer on the record. But what I remember from those days too was there was a restaurant that was not too far from there that we went to a few times, and it was known for its very brief menu, which consisted of fried chicken and cinnamon rolls. That was pretty much all you got. You sat down and you got a plate full of cinnamon rolls. It was like piled high, and then you got fried chicken. So it was very heavily caloric food that was ingested at these places. But it was kind of a funny thing that we were talking about this place all the time because of the menu. It was called Ma Glockner's, and I don't know if it's still there, but I remember after having done the sessions to mix the record, maybe like 2 weeks later, a month later, when I was back in Los Angeles, I ordered some of the cinnamon rolls to be FedExed, because it was like, let's see if this can happen. And they packed them up and put them in, Reynolds wrap, tin foil, and sealed them up and some other kind of thing. But it was just one of those things to have another sense memory of, okay, the thing's been done, but those cinnamon rolls were good enough to order one time, see if I can get them to Los Angeles. And now it's sort of commonplace. People will order food to be delivered. But this was back in 1991,
91.
Not very commonplace for that kind of thing to take place, but that's what we did. Well, it was one of those things that I had grown up having some sense that, hey, if there's a possibility that better things can take place, if people can be motivated to do something that might take a turn in the right direction, it's not a bad thing to try to do something towards that.
You're also a little more aware of it. I mean, it's like the thinking man's metal. And I think maybe that was kind of probably once again another weird niche thing at the time. I mean, think of the guys who had on the album Porno Graffiti and, and Warren and Rat, and you got these things, and you're talking about Earth and Recycling with shredding guitars. Totally different, totally left field.
Yeah. Well, the record itself is kind of scatterbrained in terms of the different kinds of songs.
I would say eclectic.
Yeah, but it's fun. It just shows a lot of different interests, and there's a sense of humor to a lot of the songs. But there are serious moments. There, even within Earth, it's got a serious message, but it's also got some humorous moments that take place in it. There's one little brief moment where there's a thing in the outro that says "Don't eat dolphins," but it goes specifically with this guitar and drum thing, and just the music kind of stops just enough for you to hear "Don't eat dolphins." So there's just these little things that happen that in the studio, that was just kind of one of those moments where I heard the guitar and the drum thing, and I thought, you know what, let's just put "Don't eat dolphins" there. It wasn't written like that specifically, but I just thought about it after hearing it go by, and then we put it in. So it's that kind of stuff that was happening all over the place.
Oh, there's lots of things. That's little talking parts and little pieces here and there.
Yeah,
it actually has a lot of the guys from Extreme, except for the drummer Paul. I don't think Paul's singing
Paul
anything.
Geary didn't play on the record, but I can't remember. I think he was in town still for a few days and maybe stopped by the studio, but
I don't
He's
think he
gone on to
sang.
become a big manager and manages different bands, and he even manages Extreme. He doesn't play with them; he just manages them now.
You got Zakk on it and Warren too.
That's right. And that one, originally, it was just going to be Warren DeMartini on that track. And that's a tune that I had where at one time, I remember it was probably like 1989 or 1990, maybe. Warren was living in this apartment in Los Angeles, this place that was called, I think it was called the Granville. I guess his house was under construction or something. So he was living in this apartment. And I went over there and we had made a little demo on a 4-track, I think it was, that he had. And the riff and the whole song Helpless was the tune that I brought over there. And he had played a solo on that, and he played so well on that song. When I actually did the recording in the studio, I said, you got to come and play a solo like the one you did on this little demo. So that was what we set out to do. But when I was recording Staying Alive, I had a lot of different guest guitar players that were on that song, and Warren played on that song as well, as did Zakk Wylde. But Zakk, being Zakk, he was at the studio and he's like, what else can I play on? And I was like, I don't know. And so we just opened up some tracks on Helpless and we let him play on that, which he sounded great on. But it was during the same time as Warren's solo. So we had to cut the part and duplicate it so that we could have Zakk play and have Warren play. So that section was never originally in the song to be a doubled solo. You had to, at that time, use razor blade edit and take that part and then extend it. So that's what exists for that to happen on the record.
I think this album is kind of a sleeper in the metal community. You know what I mean?
Well, it could be in those ways. At some point, maybe I'll revisit the record and remix the record and maybe mix it in Atmos or something, or do some kind of a, multi-decade revisit to the thing. So,
do they have an idea when they wanted to promote this for you? What label were you on for this one? I don't even know. I remember.
Well, I was always on the family label at that point. But there was a distribution arm, but it was in Europe. So it was a French company that I mostly dealt with. And there used to be a guy named Olivier Garnier who would set up a lot of stuff. And we did a lot of initial early promotion for Confessions in the UK and in France. I remember we played 4, 5, 6 shows in France, which was kind of strange, because France is not typically a real metal zone. No. But for whatever reason, at the time, there was some interest in this particular record. So we did a lot of stuff over there. And but I've always been independent since the first label deal that I had, which was My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama record that was on Chrysalis. After that, I just stayed on our family owned label. And then now I just put stuff out on my own.
As far as like promotion back then, I didn't know if because remember it was promoting and looking at an image and stuff, or were they going, hey, I don't know if you had to worry about any of that stuff or you just did your own thing. And
there wasn't a lot of thought put into an image or, branding or any of that kind of stuff at that time. It was just, here's a collection of songs. Maybe some people will like to hear these. That's pretty much how I've always done anything I do.
Well, it makes sense. I would imagine you probably have two worlds. They're going to put you in the serious world or they're going to try making you be in your dad's world. They're not going to let you just be you and let the songs follow what they do. So,
well, it was kind of a strange thing because I would say with the first 2 records I made, Having a Bad Day, my dad produced, and I did that. I made it when I was 15. And then I did the My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama record with Chrysalis Records, which was a major label deal. And I was 17 when I made that record. And so
crazy.
The Confessions, I think I was 21, maybe 22. And so it's a few years after those first two records. And there's a lot of growth in my playing and songwriting and all that stuff in between those three records. But at that time, there still wasn't a really specific thing that indicated that I was going anywhere near the same path as my father. If anything, people were making more comparisons to Van Halen in my guitar playing than they were to my dad's playing. So there's always been some sort of thing where I was being either criticized for sounding too much like Van Halen, not enough like my dad, or there was never like an encouragement to be like, hey, do your own thing, which I was doing my own thing, but I also wanted to express the interest that I had in these other kinds of sounds. And of course that happens with a lot of musicians. There's plenty of examples where you have musicians who become very famous and popular making what is their music, but it's heavily influenced by somebody else. Lenny Kravitz is influenced by all things 60s, 70s, but he still makes Lenny Kravitz music. You know, you have other bands that sound very much like Led Zeppelin, but they still were able to have a career. Like, I mean, what's that current band that sounds like Led Zeppelin and they pretend that they never
Greta
heard?
Van Fleet?
Yeah, Greta Van Fleet, you know. So the thing is, people can succeed even if their influences are very obvious. And it doesn't really matter. As long as the people like what they're hearing, they're going to go ahead and buy that thing. But my own journey as a musician, as a songwriter, guitarist, there's been a lot of evolution over 40 plus years of playing. And at the point where I am with my playing now, this would be probably the point where I sound most like me and the least like anybody else. But that's 4 decades of experimenting with every kind of sound and all that kind of stuff. So I do find it fascinating because sometimes there are musicians that find their own voice very, very early on. Van Halen is one of them. He found his own sound in his late teens, early 20s. And you have other players like Derek Trucks, who is an incredible slide guitar player, and he has always sounded like him from day one. So the chance that you're going to find exactly who you are straight out of the gate is pretty slim. It usually takes quite a bit of time to develop and understand the things that you like. You draw inspiration from things all around you. Sometimes it's more obvious in the way that you present it, and sometimes it's not. And that's just kind of the case for, I think, every musician.
The difference is the glaring light that you had on you, or Derek Trucks would have on you, or now we can say, you know, Eddie's son in Mammoth. You know what I'm saying? There's always that comparison. Whereas Eddie, when he came out, no one's going, "Oh, it just sounds like his dad," you know, the flute player, you know. Or, you know, there was nothing to be compared against. So you didn't have that extra thing against you where you were like negative or positive with people. To just find your own sound, you were kind of like, "Oh, he's like his dad." Like I said, and admittedly, I've told you this before. I didn't really know any of your dad's music. I came to you first. So
it is funny how that happens sometimes with my music. And then people discover, oh, I never even thought about listening to Frank Zappa music. Let me check it out. Because sometimes when people are really into rock music, Frank Zappa music doesn't really hit their radar.
Right. Which I'm like, Frank Zappa, doesn't he play that jazz? I'm totally into rock, you know. So, you know, that's where I was at. You were just that guy. Oh, yeah, his dad. I remember seeing his dad on like Rolling Stone. It was like the MRC cover, one of the censorship battles he did. I'm referring to. Oh yeah, that's Dweezil's dad. That's how I knew, and it was until like I said later on, where now the catalog is.
And it's always interesting how people find music. Even when I hear people talk about my dad's music and which record got them into my dad's music, I always find that pretty fascinating because he made over 65 albums in his lifetime, and they're all so drastically different, which is something that I always wanted to do in my own way was make each of my records very different from one another. But when people tell me, oh, well, I got into your dad because of the Thingfish record, that's probably the most bizarre record my dad ever made. And if that's the first one you've ever heard and that brought you in, then you start thinking, what's up with that person?
Because I want to see your other records.
Yeah. There's two versions on the record. There's the one that has the talking, and then there's the instrumental version. And I always forget which one comes first. I think the first one is the instrumental, right?
It is, yeah, because I think it's the last one. I think like an outro for that one. I think it's the last one.
The other one is called The Return of Sugar Guga Gunga, I think. And that has the vocals. So this tune, I had a guitar that was a Steinberger with a TransTrem. And that's the kind of guitar that Eddie Van Halen started using on the 5150 record. And what it would allow you to do is use the vibrato bar, where if you played a chord, and you used the vibrato bar, you could make the guitar sound like it was a slide, because the tuning of the chord that you were changing, it stayed in tune all the way down. So if you do that with a normal vibrato bar, it starts losing pitch almost instantly. But this, it's like as you press the bar down, it's the equivalent of sliding with a slide. So you could do the same where you pull up and it will also pull up in tune. But then the bridge had this thing where if you were to lock it into position, you had 5 different places where you could be using the bar freely, but then you could lock it in. And that meant that wherever you locked it in, it could either be standard tuning, or you had 3 pitches above standard tuning, and I think it was 3 or 4 pitches below standard tuning. So you could make it go really low, like B below E. And I used that guitar on a few different songs on the record where you have different tunings. So like a song like Confessions of a Deprived Youth, that song is in the lowest tuning, and that's the bar locked in. So it's really low. When you hear that come on, you'll hear that it's a pretty low tuning. And the strings are super loose at that point. So you have to hit pretty light to make them not go really out of tune. And so that guitar was really cool and interesting because you could do all those things. But also on the song, obviously influenced by the devil, you can hear it pull up and lock into place because there's a modulation towards the end of the song. But there's a few different times where that guitar is used and you can hear it kind of really change the pitch of some chords. But I definitely used it locked in different positions to have different tunings.
What happened to that guitar? At one time,
I sold it recently. I had 2 of them, and I sold them both in a sale from Reverb. But those guitars are really cool. It's just that I haven't barely played them in, I don't know, 20 years. So when things don't come out of a case for 20 years, it may be time for somebody else to make music with these things, because they shouldn't just sit and not be played by somebody.
Well, maybe with your studio now, you could hang some things up and you'll have a little more access to the toys,
Well, I think I'm looking forward to downsizing to just the things that will make the noises that I really want to make now as a guitarist. So I like the look of guitars, but I like the sound of guitars as well. Sometimes you can get the combination of both and have it look great and sound great. And I'm just trying to find the balance of what I really need, because at this point, I'm trying to just clear some of the stuff out of the way and really get focused on certain stuff. And I'm not really a collector. I don't collect anything. I don't really like to have a bunch of stuff just sitting around. So it's just, if it can be made useful, I will use it and keep it. If not, then I feel like it should be out in the wild for people to use and do something with.
At this point, you wrote down a couple of people in there that weren't on there. And the bass player in this song, you actually made up some fake pics about this. This is the Mickey Rooney.
Yeah. So on the record, I don't remember how many people are credited in a way that is erroneous.
I wrote a couple down, so we'll hit a few.
Yeah. So in the liner notes, I just thought if anybody was reading along, it would be funny for them to imagine certain people doing certain things. So having Mickey Rooney play bass on a song seemed like a pretty funny, preposterous idea.
Oh,
He
yeah.
didn't, in fact, play on the song, but I gave him credit for it anyway. You know, so stuff like that happened in the liner notes on the record. I think Clint Eastwood's credited as doing something somewhere in there.
On this one, though, actually, so it's the female voice of the woman was Michael J. Fox he put on there?
Yeah, well, that clearly wasn't the case.
Yeah. Well, clearly the time period is really funny. It's specific where it says female voice, too, so it's kind of a funny thing. I didn't know if that was a joke you had with him.
And it's called F.L.A.K because the song never had a title when we were rehearsing it. It started with the drum, where a F.L.A.K is kind of like when it's a flam where you hit the drum and the sticks arrive at the drum at two different times. So it's P-plack or plack, you know, but we just called it F.L.A.K.
F.L.A.K.
So it just stuck as the title. So, but I've heard a lot of people try to read into it, and some people are like, oh, does that stand for fuck with a kiss? No,
right.
It's the snare drum.
Oh, and then awesome solo by Tim Pearson. I love him too. I mean, so whoever heard of him, go out and check him out. He's just great. He has his own little web show.
Yeah, he's a really good player. And I remember going to see him play a few times when he was playing with Rick Springfield. And he had a great guitar sound, and he was using a guitar from Performance Guitar, and Performance Guitar had built guitars for me and also for my dad. So it was just one of those things where it was a small community of guitar people that knew about Performance Guitar.
Yeah.
And around that time, I was really interested in learning more about his style of playing. So I had contacted him initially to see if he wanted to give me a couple of guitar lessons. We just became friends. I played on a record he made. He played on a couple of things I made. Even he played a solo on the What the Hell Was I Thinking record, which is not finished yet. So he's played on different things for me over the years. And like you said, you know, great player. So people should.
You actually have Josh now for drums, but you also have John Stamos. Now he does play drums. He does. Yeah. And he was special. Now, is it a joke because he was the drummer for the Beach Boys at the time?
I think it was just, you know, these kinds of random things to make somebody think, is it possible? Could that
was possible back then, though.
Yeah. So it walks the fine line. But no, he did not play drums on it. It was just Josh. But it's the kind of thing where if somebody was really taking all those things seriously, it could have given them that much more enjoyment for the record. Or it could have given them pause to think, I don't know what's going on here. So it was just kind of a fun way to be a little goofy with some of the credits.
Oh, I was the
credit even if they didn't have anything to do with it.
Well, and I read it before. I was like, you know, I saw Mickey Rooney. I'm like, that can't be it. But then when I saw John Stamos, I'm thinking back at the time, like 91. I think he did the Beach Boys, like Kokomo, and he was playing drums, and he was pretty big. Uncle Jesse doing a lot of stuff. I'm like, you know, that could have happened. And you know, they told you then there's the Zappa factor where you're like, you know, you got to throw everything in with a grain of salt there. You know,
it could have happened. So maybe one day I will get him to play drums on something.
That's awesome. So, and Nuno does some really good vocals on this one. Not that he doesn't, but lead vocals on this one, which was, you know, which was really nice.
So that tune is an interesting one because it started, that was actually the first song that I wrote for the Confessions record. And it was kind of like I wrote it, I had this seafoam green Stratocaster, which I don't have anymore, that I played, and it was finger style, just plucking the strings, and it was a real specific guitar part. But when you hear the record, the guitar doesn't really cut through because the sound of it was, I guess it's a little just too thin and it's in competition with the piano. But even before the piano got on there, the guitar wasn't speaking. It wasn't giving enough depth of sound.
Yeah.
So the piano ended up coming in to bolster the harmonic content. But that really was much more of a very specific guitar song before, but you don't hear it that way based on the way that it's mixed. It's definitely got some weird little moments where there's a couple of odd time signature things, and it kind of skips and does some things.
Which leads to what you said before. This is the album that shows your beginning of being much more malleable in your songwriting, where it really changes up, you know?
Yeah.
Where you get the textures are changing in your songs and stuff. You really had a fun time by putting a lot of people in this one. Now, we know Ahmed, you guys are doing stuff, but after harmonies, this was funny. You put down MC Hammer and Paula Abdul, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
But now,
well, if you listen really hard, you know, you might be able to pick them out.
I could hear his pants shuffling for MC Hammer, but that's about it. But you did put background vocals. You put your brother, and then you put Nuno, of course. But then you put Clint Eastwood. But there's a little more different. There's something different about the Clint Eastwood you're going to tell me about.
Right. Well, Clint Eastwood, he did not sing on that one, but it would have been hilarious if he was.
Stuck out.
If you just imagine, like, you know, Nuno and me and Clint Eastwood, and we all got one headphone on, and we're just, you know, singing along to this version of this Beatles tune. But the thing about Clint Eastwood is I used to play a fair amount of golf, and I once was playing in a golf tournament, which happened to be on the island of Lanai in Hawaii, you know, like with the smaller island. And at the hotel where the golf course was, there was this thing that was set up for guests of the hotel to have an evening to hear a discussion, a roundtable discussion with a few of the guests that were playing in this golf tournament. And so it ended up being me and Clint Eastwood and a guy who was a huge movie producer at the time named David Wolper. David Wolper made he did so many things. He did Roots, and he produced the Olympics in 1984 or somewhere thereabouts. I guess that was the time when it was. But he did one of my favorite movies of all time, which was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You know, that the original version.
Mm-hmm.
So
I got it.
So the thing about him was I was playing the golf tournament was kind of like a team event. You would play with certain people, and so I was on David Wolper's team. But the thing about David was he liked that I could hit the ball far, because when you work as a team, it's like, okay, you play from the best ball. So you drive, like, whoever hit the furthest or best shot, everybody then gets to hit the next shot from there. So he liked to be on the team with me because I was hitting the ball far and it was in the fairway. So he didn't know how to say my name for the first several days of like knowing him. So he would say, I want to get that guy Tweezers on my team. He called me Tweezers. So I think I even ended up being called Tweezers by him that night at that roundtable discussion with Clint Eastwood. So it was just this really strange experience. But here I am, have nothing to do. These guys are all big time movie guys, tons of movie stories. And the majority of everybody in that room would have known whatever they had been up to and have no clue what I was up to at all, or couldn't care less. But anyway, I did get called upon to answer a few questions, and I did have a little back and forth conversation with both of those guys, but it was definitely a surreal moment for me to be part of a panel discussion with, I mean, if you saw it on paper, it just looks ridiculous. David
I'm
Wolper,
trying to visualize it.
And Dweezil Zappa.
And back then too, because I mean, now, your hair's shorter and you present differently. But back then, your hair was long, you had the rocker look.
Yeah.
There are a lot more straight laced looking guys, and you were just totally the rocker guy too, so you probably stood out even more.
Yeah. And then it was just so incongruous because we were there because of golf, So another thing, and maybe it would have made more sense for leisurely things for people in the movie industry, but at that time it wasn't really that well known as part of a rock and roll tradition.
That's hilarious. Tweezers. Well, golfers do have some funny names though, like Fuzzy Zeller, and they got some really that kind of falls into that scheme. That's funny. So why anytime what was the pick of that one? Just a favorite song or growing up?
Well, I love the Beatles, but I had this 12-string guitar it was a Steinberger 12-string guitar, and it was in the studio, and Anytime at All had a 12-string lick on it, the Beatles version, and I thought, well, what would happen if I just made this a little bit more rock and just 12-string with a little more distortion? And I just decided to record that song, and that's what it turned out like.
Number 8 track, Vanity, and you actually had a video for that, and that's kind of got a little rap sort of in there. Was that a little tongue in cheek, kind of with the times? And
and it was my sister Moon and my cousin Lala who did the rap vocals.
Okay, I recognize Moon. Yeah.
And Vanity from Prince Vanity, all that. She was in the video.
Okay.
So it was just one of those weird things. Also in the video was Robert Wagner, and Robert Wagner has been in all of my videos. He's the one piece that is the continuity for all the videos that I made.
He'll be the tie-in when they do the VHS release of all your videos then, right?
Yeah, so he was in the Let's Talk About It video. He was in Gotta Get to You. He was in Vanity. He was in, what else did we do? I did a thing that was a pretend promotion, like a late night TV show, all night shopping kind of thing, where when I made the album Music for Pets, he was one of the celebrity testimonials talking about how when his horses listened to Music for Pets, it really improved their lives. So he was pretty funny because he's like, the thing that stood out was that he said, they really liked these songs. It was spooky. So it's just like the most wrong thing to say, about it. So it's perfect.
That's awesome. How do you see always involved with these things, like family friend or?
I used to date his daughter, Katie. And so I went on a lot of trips with them and just stayed in touch with them over the years. And he's just always been a great guy. He was on a TV show I did too, that was called On the Spot for the WB network. Mm-hmm. I was the music director for this show, and it was an improv show. It was really a fun show to do, but he was a guest star. And so he got to do improv with the actors, but I had to do all the music that related to whatever was going on in the scenes. And there was an element to the show where the audience, the in-studio audience, could actually be part of the show in the sense that they could choose what would happen in a scene. They could choose the direction. So they could say, at this point, a song is going to take place. Do you want it to be a punk rock song, a country song, a heavy metal song? So by a round of applause, they would select what it would be. And then we would have to play the song, and the people would have to be able to improvise and work within the context of whatever that music was. So I had to wear an IFB unit, an earpiece, so that I could be in with the control room so that we could know, okay, it's going to be country. Okay, go, so it was that kind of thing. So it was a really fun show to do, but he was a guest star on that show.
That was his thing, being a guest star back then. Everything, all the shows, you were the guest star. Robert Wagner was on everything. He was Love Boat, this and that.
Yep.
I think that show was actually on YouTube. I think I've seen a couple episodes. That's
Well, there is a thing that is from the taping of that show where Jack Black does a version of Crazy Train, and I'm
Yeah.
playing the Van Halen Rasta guitar, and the
Okay.
Crazy Train, the Ozzy Osbourne Crazy Train, wasn't on the actual show. This was just what was filmed while in between setups. We would play songs for the audience, and the cameras were filming as we did that for posterity. And that version of Crazy Train is what you see.
See, we're clearing up all these other things because you have so many different little shows. You have some other show too. Some of the musical show you had on. They're all over.
Oh,
YouTube.
the other one that was on the USA Network. The what the hell was it called? It was a game show thing that me and my brother were hosting. Happy Hour.
Yeah, that looked pretty fun.
That was a fun show. That was kind of ahead of its time.
It was, and that was pretty good. And we won't talk about the sitcom you were on for 2 minutes.
Oh yeah, there was that one too.
I know.
Yeah,
that didn't
Normal
happen.
Life.
Right. So, Staying Alive, obviously it's a cover song, but you had a few people on there. Vocals, Donny Osmond. That actually, Donny.
That is
that
actually Donny Osmond.
Because there's a country joke, right? A little country, little rock and roll joke on that one.
Yeah. But so what actually happened with that was I decided I wanted to record Staying Alive because I always liked the song, even though people at a certain point kind of made fun of the song because, oh, it's disco, it's this or the other. But you cannot escape the fact that it's got a very hooky riff. And it's totally a memorable song. But I thought, okay, what would happen if we just changed the context? And now it's a heavy rock riff, but the melody is the same and all that other stuff. Play it like the original, but just with distortion and make it heavier. And so I originally had Ozzy Osbourne sing it. And Ozzy Osbourne did an amazing job singing it. But at the point where I was going to release it, for some reason, his record company decided that they wouldn't let him have it be released. So I had to replace him. And I thought, well, who could I replace him with? And it went from the Ozman to an Osmond. And I said, let's get Donny Osmond. And so Donny, who is an incredible singer, did everything in just one or two takes of all the stuff that he did. And we have a couple little jokes in there where we've got a joke about purple socks and, stuff that's from the Osmond TV era. And it was just fun. I used to go on his show. He had a show with his sister. It was a talk show. I went on there a couple times. I was also in one of his videos where I was a bartender and I had a really crazy hairdo that looked like Medusa or something. And I had weird makeup and I had a crazy face. So that was, there's all these little cameos and things that go back and forth that took place during this time. So
it's interesting for us on the outside to know because how this all overlaps in here, but it's good. So you do the first solo on it. Zakk comes in, does his thing. Then Steve Lukather does his thing and then Warren, then Nuno, and Tim Pierce. I mean, it's 6 guitar players on that one.
Yeah,
and right?
It was just funny to imagine not just one solo, but 6 solos. In a song that nobody wants to hear as a heavy metal song, you also get 6 guitar solos. So imagining, how to pitch this the most preposterous way. Here's a song you never wanted to hear, plus 6 guitar solos. So that's what it was.
And it's great, and everybody stands out in their styles too. When you hear it, and I heard it, I'm like, oh, that's Zakk. Like you could hear their style in the song too. So it plays well together.
But it's also kind of a hint of what the Hell Was I Thinking record sounds like. Because as you hear these guys just kind of come in and they play and they do their own thing, but they're outside of their natural element. That is what the Hell Was I Thinking record is all about, is hearing people either directly in their element or completely outside of their comfort zone. And that's what I've chosen to try to create with that record. And you'll hear it in a similar way when that record is finished. guitar players will just sort of be popping out of the speakers, but yet the music is constantly changing. At least on Stayin' Alive, they're playing over a contiguous piece that's similar. In this case, it's really actually changing almost all the time.
Yeah, you keep building up where you're gonna have to get it out at some point before.
I know, I got to get it finished.
Like, how long is it now at this point? How long is it?
Well, it still will only be 75 minutes long, but it's just taking a lot of different turns. By the time I actually get a chance to really work on it and finish it, I will probably take out 40% of what's there and replace it with new stuff, because there are a lot of new players that I'd like to get on there, but also some of the things that I did back at that time, I don't need to do now. There were things where I played some of my dad's music, a little piece of G-Spot Tornado or a little piece of City of Tiny Lights. But I don't need to have any of that stuff in there because I've been playing my dad's music so much that.
All right, so the next track is Maybe Tonight. Now that one you just have, it's pretty basic, but it says backing vocals Clint Eastwood, which clearly isn't. Anything about that track that sticks out?
Well, that track is also really early on in the writing for the record. So The Kiss and Maybe Tonight, I think I wrote maybe the same day or within days of each other. And that tune has this thing that I was experimenting with where there's in the guitar part and the rhythm part, there's kind of like a pedal steel style bend. So it's really hard to do for me on the guitar, where you have two fingers that are set up on lower strings, and then you are able to use this finger to bend a note a full step or a half step, and you can kind of maneuver it while you're playing, and you get these kind of pedal steel things. So there's different parts that happen in the rhythm part where I'm doing that, and it's a cool guitar part. I've never done another song that has that kind of
that sounds
technique.
horribly hard to do. I would need to hold my own hand to do it and have somebody strum.
It's kind of tough. I mean, my hands are not really strong. I always use light strings, so that helps. But that's part of what you hear in that tune. And when you listen to it, the guitar sound isn't that far forward, so it kind of doesn't jump out. It was a big focus of the song for playing it, but it's not super focused in the mix. So that's something that if I remixed it at some point, I would bring that forward.
The front.
But that has a good guitar solo in it where I think this record overall, if you listen to my guitar playing on it, a lot of the solos are filled with certain things that are pre-composed. And this is a thing that I think most guitar players were doing at that time. You would create a song and then you would have a solo that was specific to the song, but it was also supposed to show off whatever your latest musical ideas or technique was. And that particular solo has a lot of things going on in it. It's a melodic solo, but it has a lot of finger tapping stuff that goes across different strings and some alternate picking stuff that's kind of tricky and complicated, but it moves through chord changes. That's kind of one of the first times that I was doing something like that, where it really moved a lot through chord changes. I think Bad Girl had a little similar kind of thing that happened. But this solo is one of the more complex solos that I did. I think of the three most complex solos on the record are Bad Girl, Gotta Get to You, and Maybe Tonight. So those were all, they had parts that I worked out so that I could play them so that they would be in specific orders, the things that would play and all tie together, as opposed to just straight improv. There were definitely some improv solos on the record, but at that time I was operating more in the pre-composed, write a part, play the part, and it stays that way. Whereas now I'm much more free form and mostly improv, especially live. It's 99% improvised when I'm soloing. So but that takes a long time to develop a vocabulary so that you are comfortable to be able to just react to the music and do stuff. And I prefer that. I feel like that's a more interesting way to play and more musical than to just specifically execute a part. But there's value in that as well. If you have a really cool musical idea that you want to say, hey, these things go great together and I'm going to play it just like this. And so there might be times when you play something that you don't like, but you just keep going because that's just what happens in a live situation. And what I realized pretty early on from playing live shows is that if you play something that you don't like, you really should never be in the position to telegraph that you're upset with something because the audience will pick up on it. So sometimes you'll see people that will get really like in a bad mood if they play something, or they'll like start throwing things or knocking stuff over. And who wants that? I mean, it was cool, I guess, to see certain people in the beginning days of rock, like Pete Townsend, who'd get temperamental and destroy some shit, but in a way for him, that was an artistic expression.
I hate seeing guitars destroyed. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah,
if you saw a question and watch your SG is like one of my favorite guitars, and it's like to see that you'd be like, no, that'd be the worst thing ever.
I would not think to destroy an instrument in that way ever, but
that's what the airline is for. So
yeah, well, that's happened a few times with some of my guitars. But
yes,
the point is, when you're playing live, even if you play a couple of notes that are not what you wanted, if you play a bunch of other notes that are what you wanted, at the point where that is taking precedence, that's what's going to be more memorable to an audience than the couple of notes that have just whizzed by that they probably didn't notice like you did. So you can't let yourself get into a mental state of being worried about what just happened. You have to be in the moment and be here from that point forward. And that's kind of a hard thing to do, but that's what I've always tried to do.
Well, I think the other advantage you have in like the phrasing musical vocabulary is as you've gotten better and you've played it for so much, the areas to play. So you might not like the flow of that solo or piece. It's not going to be like a horrible bad note. Like you're playing, like an occasion system. Like you're playing in the areas where it's going to sound good. So it's not like it's going to be like, screamingly bad notes. You know what I mean? And that's
the other thing is that I have also tuned my ear to recognize more dissonance, and I actually like a certain amount of dissonance in what happens. So sometimes when I'm playing, I will intentionally put my hands in places that I have no idea where I am, just because I know that I'll play differently because I'll have to find a way to get to somewhere familiar. So it's like being tossed out of a plane. And you're like, okay, I got to do something. But in those instances, you realize you're only ever a half step away from a chord tone. So really at any time, you could decide to hit a quote unquote wrong note, but that wrong note could be the thing that happens at such the right moment in time that it adds such interest, so that the next note that you get to resolves in a way that it never would have if you played more of a contextual, a note that was supposed to fit better. So that's what you hear in jazz a lot, where people specifically are trying to target a note on a downbeat, but they'll get there in some kind of way where it's shifting, chromatically up or, below, above or below the note. So there's always these little games that are happening with your fingers. And I don't play by the traditional rules of any kind of, say, jazz harmony or anything like that. Right. I just start trying to do stuff that is I want to, it's like a game of Twister or something. You want to see what happens if you get into a certain place. How can you untwist yourself? And that's kind of the game that I play in my mind when I'm playing my best. I'm not really thinking, but I'm allowing stuff to happen that is not, it's not familiar. You know, I'm just trying to hear what's happening in the music and respond to it and play texturally and melodically with something that I've not done before. And that doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, that's a really cool thing. And that's what my dad loved to do, was just to be able to play in the moment like that and do something he'd never done before. And to be able to set yourself up for that kind of freedom is a challenge, and you may or may not land on your feet, but if you go for it, there's something to be said just for that.
Well, yeah, I agree. And it's very, it makes it much more interesting too in your show. So, you know, it sounds fantastically fun when you do it, you know what I mean? Because you just don't know. But I mean, like, you know enough of the rules, you know enough of the rules to break the rules too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
to
I mean,
just go out and do it, not know anything would be a nightmare.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you don't know anything, then your chances are you're going to make a lot more mistakes. But if you know enough and you have strategies to get from one place to another, but you are still open enough to just exploring and not having a predictable sense of, oh, I know what happens if I hit this note, it's going to sound this way. Mm-hmm. It's kind of exciting to hit a note and have no idea what it's going to sound like. And that's kind of where I am. I know enough musical terminology and music theory to have a sense of what things are supposed to be, but I'm not so in tune to that I can predict what it will sound like all the time. I'm at a point where there's still plenty of experiments to happen, where if I play a note at a certain point, I don't know what I'm going to get, and it's going to be good or bad, but I'm going to go with it either way because that's the choice that I made. It's a pretty fun one to do, and it has a couple of little things where Confessions of a Deprived Youth, if you mishear that, it could sound like Confessions of a Deep Fried Youth. So we actually say that at one point in one of the lyrics. And there's other things like Nuno starts to play a piano solo and it's like solo. And then there's because of saying solo, Rob Lowe became part of the whole mix, you know? So we start singing Rob Lowe at some point. So it's stuff like that just happens in the studio where you just go with something. There's no real plan, but you say, oh, let's try it. And then it just sticks.
You got to get to you. Now that had a video with it.
Right.
You had your fun glove hands. Robert Wagner was at the end. It's going to ask you that. You already answered the question. I was like, who is that at the end? Looks familiar. You actually had an Eddie Van Halen guitar in there. Was that from Eddie?
I had a few guitars that were painted like Van Halen guitars at that time. But
it actually said 5150 on it. It wasn't his.
No, that one was funny because it actually said 5149.5. Oh, and the headstock said Shamer instead of Kramer. So that guitar was in there and some other ones too. But the hands were from the costume of H.R. Pufnstuf. And H.R. Pufnstuf was a costume that I was able to get for the day from Sid and Marty Krofft. It was the actual H.R. Pufnstuf costume, and Robert Wagner wears it at the end of the video. So it's just it's just one of those things where you can't, never in your wildest dreams would you imagine that Robert Wagner could have possibly ever been in the H.R. Pufnstuf costume, but yet there it is, you know.
It's a shame because there's only like one video out there. It's like a really grainy copy. It's probably didn't catch all the details on YouTube. It'd be nice to see a full version of that because I think it's a lost treasure. It really is. And it's fun. You get some nice guitars. Like you have a nice one of your dad painted on it. You have some Dr. Seuss. It's a good song too.
Thanks. Yeah, again, there's a lot of things in that song that are, I think, some of it you can tell there's a pretty good Van Halen influence in there, but the solo is at that time, maybe that's the most technically advanced solo of mine on the record as far as the finger tapping stuff and other things that are involved. And that one was a solo that when I would play that song live, I would try to play that song, that solo note for note. And it was pretty hard to replicate it. It's a pretty berserk solo.
Get to you. The drummer, is that actually Josh?
Yeah, it's
playing
Josh.
That's actually him with his green suspenders, like he's the Joker, he's all crazy and stuff.
Yeah,
all right.
That's Josh in the video.
Hilarious guy.
Yeah.
All right, so Pain and Love is another jamming song.
It was an instrumental. So that one, I think, if you listen to the intro for that, that's probably the closest that you could sense of my Zappa heritage. You know, that there's some stuff in there that's pretty strange, time signature wise, and melodically it's a little bit twisted. But that short intro, that just set the tone for the rest of the song, which then kind of has an uplifting kind of feel at times, but that's also got that TransTrem where it later on it actually does modulate, where I pull it up to the F sharp tuning. But the intro for Obviously Influenced by the Devil, the only other similar thing on the Confessions record is the intro for Earth, which is the classical piece that I wrote. That's the intro. You know, the record starts with the orchestra tuning up, and then you hear just all electric guitars playing in a Brian May style orchestral arrangement. But that had a lot of unaccompanied guitar just playing, and it's similar in a way to the Obviously Influenced by the Devil part, just in terms of the structure of how the song gets set up, you know, a real heavily orchestrated intro before the song.
It's probably one of my favorite songs on the album. So I really like that one a lot.
The solo though that I do on that one is a real kind of clean sounding solo, and that one's completely improvised, but it, for some reason, if you listen back to it, it really has a Mark Knopfler kind of sound to it. And
I'm gonna have to listen to it now.
Yeah, so that one is it's very stratty. I mean, I played that Seafoam Green Strat on there, and I like Mark's playing. I'd like to get him on What the Hell Was I Thinking?
He's great.
So that one, and this again is kind of ahead of its time, but it's like a Beavis and Butthead kind of thing, where it's two metal guitar players talking about metal guitar and being incredibly stupid about everything having to do with music. And so it's just me and Nuno.
Just laughing, thinking about some of the lines.
Yeah, and I'm talking in a terrible Boston accent. And so it starts off with a phone call, and it's like, hello? Hey, dude, who's this? Like, he doesn't know who it is.
Right.
And then he's like, dude, you want to come over and jam, dude? Yeah, dude. And then you hear the airplane crash into something and falling down the steps, and there's a cow and all that stuff. And then the song starts. So it's just all that stuff, the sound design, just to make it as stupid as possible. And then we start talking about all these different guitar players like Jeff Beck and Joe Satriani and Eddie Van Halen and Joe Perry. It's like, dude, I saw Joe Perry at Carnival, dude, you know? And it's like, dude looks like a late, no, dude, don't say that, dude. So like, no, dude, don't say that, dude, was a thing that sort of ended each verse. We would say something, and then we get to the point where it was something that was, you shouldn't say that. And then you had to bring it back in. And that came from this guy that was Nuno's guitar tech at that time. He had this hilarious personality, and he wanted to, he was always super helpful, but he would offer up whatever he had, even to the point of being ridiculous. Like he walked in one day and he was eating a cherry popsicle. He's like, dude, you want some? Like, no, dude. You know, it's like, it was stuff like that where we would just take these isms that were from all around, and that's just how the song became what it was. And the part at the end where we're playing the Pentecostal scale, both, you know, Nuno and I play this lick at the end, and we did it live. We both played this lick at the same time, and it's a big stretch. It's 3 frets apart, 3 notes per string, 3 frets apart, and we play this lick. It goes up, ascending, and then descending. But we played it just live as a single take. And
Really?
it was one of these things where if you are a fan of Van Halen, you learn a certain kind of position, a stretch that he would do. And this is just a thing that was a total Van Halen pattern, but we put it in diminished harmony. So it sounds like the devil, but we played it live. That last part, when you hear it, if you listen back to it, that thing where we're playing in harmony, we just did that as a single overdub where we both played together and just did it.
It's great. It's a funny song though. I remember that. I had forgotten about that when I came back and revisited it. I was like, this is so funny.
Yeah, there's some pretty stupid parts in it.
It is, but it holds up well. It does hold up well. Like the album does itself though. It's a really good album. Or CD or tune. I mean, as they are, but this is really, like I said, this is the album that really kind of jumps up. I actually have some other stuff on vinyl, but that was the first one I really sunk my teeth into, of like, you know, of as a guitar player, you establish yourself as something beyond your peers. You know, you're kind of your first step forward.
Oh, I appreciate it. It was definitely a fun record to make, and I really enjoyed writing the songs and seeing them come to life. And I felt like it definitely did show off a little bit more of my own playing style. But, you know, there's all kinds of people that I've played with in different ways, live or in the studio. Steve Lukather, I played with him with Spinal Tap a couple times. And, you know, so there's all kinds of just funny things that take place, and it's just an ongoing bit, you know?
You take care.
All right. See you later.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.